got a bunch that's a little bit different.
I'm kind of jealous of Paul Pape. This guy has creativity oozing out of every pore of his body. And I'm one of those dudes that has absolutely zero creativity. I sat down and talked to this designer, set designer, this special effects and Hollywood expert who's created some stuff that you have 100% seen in the background, but you would never know it was Paul's creativity. And then this episode, we talk a lot about what Paul's been through in his childhood. We talk about his creativity. And then this conversation took a turn I didn't expect. We started talking about the courage to pursue a dream and be willing to risk failure. And what happens if you're just not willing to take the risks and be creative. So I hope you're going to be inspired by listening to my guest, Paul Pape, on this episode of Unbeatable.
These stories of triumph over adversity will help you handle your toughest days in life and become unbeatable.
Hey, Paul, welcome to this episode of Unbeatable. Thanks for being my guest, man.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
Yeah, I have been interested in talking about your background because you have been behind the scenes in a lot of stuff that people all over the world would recognize. They would just never, ever put your name with it, right?
Nope, that's the whole point.
Yeah, I like your style, man. That way you can go to a grocery store and not get swarmed by fans or have the paparazzi following you when you're trying to pump gas into your Bentley, right?
That's right, Bentley.
Yeah. Well, that's a nod to, I don't know, who was it that ran out of gas in her Bentley and she didn't know how it works, that this thing works on gas. I don't even remember who that was. Hey man, I'd love to find out how you got your start in the entertainment industry. What was it that caught your attention? Was it some high school musical back when you were a teenager and you decided I want to be that kid? What was it, man?
Yeah, you kind of hit the nail on the head there. Yeah, it was. I started off as an actor, and it was in high school. I had a couple bit parts in elementary school.
No, I was actually just joking, but you're for real. It was in high school that you decided I want to try this thing.
100%. 100%. Yeah. And the reason is and maybe this is a question for later, but I'll jump into it. Is I launched myself into education at a young age to avoid some abuse at home. And so I went to self-imposed year-round school until I was in the 10th grade. Then that was basically just to avoid all the bad that was happening at home. And so what happened is I delved so much into education and just to kind of find basically like some kind of, I wanted form in my life that I wasn't getting anywhere else. I wanted structure. And so I went into high school and I auditioned for a play. And what attracted me so much about that was that I could be someone else. And so when you're an actor,
I love it. Yeah.
You get to just, and here's what I learned. Really good stage presence, really good voice, horrible at memorizing lines. So when I got out of high school, I was the lead in like every show in high school. I don't know why they would choose me.
Oh, so I was thinking you were the guy that was in the tree, the tree in the background that was just permanently frozen with no voice, no words at all.
No, they kept giving me the lead, and I was the worst guy to be on stage with because I could remember the first line and the last line, but all that weird stuff in the middle, forget that.
Who needs that junk?
Right?
I got the first and the last line. Everything else, I'll just ad lib.
And so I got into college, and I'm a guy who's like 2 feet in. I'm like, if I'm going to do something, I'm just going to do it. And so when I got into undergrad, I'm like, I declared major first day. I was going to be a theater major. I went in for acting.
Okay, hold on. Where did you go to school?
I went to the University of Nebraska, Omaha.
Okay, which has an incredible theater department, right?
Yeah, of like 11 to 15 people.
Who cares what USC and Southern California are doing, right? Or what Southern California and the rest of those guys are doing.
I mean, there's an irony here. I was accepted into NYU for their acting program, but I couldn't afford to go. And so I'm like, whatever. And so then at the last minute, I decided to go to, we call it West Dodge High School because I'm in Omaha at the time. And it was basically just it was a commuter college. Even though it was a state university. Anyways, they had a great department, but within like a month and a half of being there as a freshman, I was told I would never be on stage.
By your professors, right? I
Uh-huh.
love this.
Yeah.
Like, hey, kid, you absolutely chose. If there is such a thing as a wrong major, you just chose it because you are the world's worst.
A lot of presence, no
Yeah.
ability to act. So so what happened is I was actually doing some because as a major you have to do every aspect of theater, and so I was doing stagecraft at the time, and I had the dean of the department actually came down, and he was I don't know what, I have no idea how he came to this decision, but he asked me if I wanted to learn how to do every aspect of theater. And as somebody who was no longer going to be acting, I was like, yeah, sure, let's do it. And so he literally,
Yeah. I just need a job.
yeah.
Literally, I just need a job when I leave this program, right?
And so
So
that kind of got
whatever it is.
into design. I got into design because he showed me that kind of stuff. And what was nice is I'd been making things with my hands since I was little, and imagination has always been something that I've really kind of leaned into as well as the education. And so I started getting into set design, and I won some awards like right off the bat, some
Oh,
national
come on, man.
recognized awards. And so that went over really well. So then I went to grad school for it as well, and then I won an international award for design. I was handed a beautiful Fabergé egg from the president of Fabergé for Fabergé Design Award.
No, you did not get a
Oh
Fabergé
yeah,
egg.
yeah.
I've only seen those things behind glass in the museum.
Mine sits on
Isn't
a
that Joker?
shelf collecting dust.
It doesn't. Aren't those Jokers worth thousands and tens of thousands of dollars?
It is, which is why I keep it on. Like if you see here, what you see behind me right now is this is actually a
You're
20-foot wall that is filled with the stuff that I've done. And
wow.
I actually, it sits on just one of the shelves, because if anybody came in, they wouldn't recognize anything being worth that much money, but I don't know what else to do with it. So it sat in my bathroom for years, but yeah.
That's exactly where you should put a Fabergé egg, like one of the priceless, pieces of art, world recognized piece of art. Most of the time when people get an award, it's a little piece of plexiglass that they're going to stick on a shelf, and you couldn't trade it in at a pawn shop for $5. They give you an award that people will literally mortgage their entire home to afford,
Yeah,
and you stick it in the bathroom.
I did.
I love it.
So, and then the irony is I get out of 3 years of graduate program. I went to University of California, San Diego. So they had
All right, now we're talking. Now
ranked
we're
number
getting
2 in the
serious.
nation for theater,
Yeah.
in theater design. And I was working with a guy who had 4 shows on Broadway at the time. And so I was talking to him. I was his assistant. I was like, hey, John, his name is John Arnone. I was like, John, how's it feel to be like the apex of scenic design? Because you're designing on Broadway. This is awesome. He goes, this sucks. I'm like, what do you mean? He goes,
he's the king of the industry, and he tells you this just my life sucks.
and he did. He says, like, I travel 48 weeks out of the year. He goes, I've got 6 assistants, and all they do is just try to keep up with the paperwork. I'm paying for an apartment in New York. I'm never in. He goes, if you ever want to settle down, like put down roots, this is not the job for you. And I'm like, I just got my degree in this, dude. Like, what am I supposed to do?
Thank you for crushing my dreams,
Yeah.
John.
And so I made a 180-degree pivot, like right there. I designed a product for scenic designers and dollhouse makers called pop-out furniture, which is like little laser die-cut paper furniture. You could fold it and make little furniture out of it. And so I ran that wave for a while, but then everyone started getting lasers in their home. So I'm like, I don't know what I'm going to do. And eventually I got into prop making because I'd always made little toys and stuff for people. And back before there was the internet for everyone else, a student of mine, because I was teaching college for 3 years and just, it was not for me, but he's like, hey, Paul, can you make me these little figures called Mii's from the Nintendo Wii that came out in like 05, 06? And I was like, yeah, sure. So we put them online and it went viral, and I started getting requests from all over the world, and I made thousands of these little figures for people. They're very much custom to them. Yeah. And it was the first thing I ever did that went viral. And so I asked my wife, I was like, can I quit teaching and just try and do this full time? And she's like, I'll give you 1 year. And I'm like, oh, okay. And then I think in the first 3 months, I made $50,000 by having another viral thing go through.
Wow.
And she's like, all right, I think you can hack this. And that was 20 years ago. So, then now I'm working for companies like Disney, Nickelodeon, Universal, you name it, as well as thousands of people around the world. But, everybody recognizes the big names.
I was looking at your resume, and it's showing me all of the studios and the big firms that you've worked for. And I'm like, this is pretty much everybody who's who in the entertainment industry. And you've been working for them behind the scenes. And by behind the scenes, I mean really behind the scenes.
Yes.
I'm blown away by the creativity of set designers. I was watching this little documentary with my daughter a while back, and it was talking about some of the sets that they just threw together at the last second to try to convince audiences that we were in a different world or a different place. And it was showing, like this is what you're really looking at. It was just spray painted to look different. And I was like, that's whoever came up with that idea is just genius. Because I'm looking at basically garbage that they pulled out of the dump. Somebody spray painted it, stapled it to the wall, and now it looks like I'm in another country or another world. Let's go back in time. You were talking about school. You were talking about how you were the greatest actor on campus when you were in high school. And then you mentioned self-imposed, I wrote this down, self-imposed year-round school, which for any normal child, a teenager, this is a form of torture as bad as waterboarding. You have to have a pretty bad childhood. And I want to get serious for a second. If you are saying, I would rather be in school when the rest of the kids are out playing rather than have to go home and be at home. So what was happening at home that was so bad that you would rather be in school year round?
It was a lot of mental and physical abuse. I'm a Gen Xer, so a child of the 70s. You wake up, sun's up, get the hell out, and then come back when the sun comes down, type situation.
You and me are too, probably pretty close in age.
Yep.
Go out when the sun comes up and don't come back till the sun goes down.
I mean, when they've got commercials telling your parents, hey, remember you got kids? Do you know where your children are? It's 10 o'clock. It's because they didn't know where we were. But the thing of it is like my dad traveled a lot with business. And so is my mom raising 3 boys, and my older brother especially is got some mental health issues. And so there was a lot of just trying to wrangle us together. And between him and, just my mom and even my dad, when he was home, it was just a lot of like mental and physical abuse. And so I didn't really have, like, one of the things, like the reason I have what I call the nerd wall, the thing behind me, is because as a kid, one of the forms of like it was always one-upsmanship, but it always in the wrong way. So if I did something to, like, if I would move something of my brother's and he could see that the dust pattern was disturbed, he would come in and destroy everything that I owned. And so I had no choice. So that's why I started making things, because I thought if he destroyed it, I could just make it again. And so I quit collecting things until I became an adult and I had my own house. And I was like, oh, I'm gonna start collecting things again, or start making more things that are collectibles. And so, yeah, after my mom loves to tell the story, is that after first grade, I came home on the bus and I cried for 3 days straight until she put me in summer school. And what I didn't realize until I was in my 30s, and I talk about being oblivious to stuff, is we were not a wealthy family. So when I did summer school, it was summer school for kids who failed school, not summer school for kids who wanted to excel. Like, we have all these advanced gifted programs nowadays. No, not the case. And so when I went there, I'd show up on the first day of summer school, I had my backpack on, had my lunchbox, and I was the happiest kid in the world because I got to be back in class, and everyone there hated me because I was like, what homework can we get?
They're all going through a form of torture right now. Yeah. And you're the kid that's smiling and happy to be here.
Yeah. Got my arm up in the air. And, and that's the thing, is like, I love to learn. I really do. And it's an interesting dichotomy because being education focused is very linear. It's, it's all very linear thought process. Yeah. But being creative is the complete opposite. And that's, you're aloof, you're pulling ideas from everywhere. And so rarely do those two actually combine together. They're usually seen as opposites. And so the fact that I have been able to pivot and use my education with my creativity has been like one of my strongest suits, which is why these bigger companies call me up, because they have an issue and they can't figure it out. They're like, let's call Paul. And usually I have something that comes like right off the top of my dome, and they're like, hey, that's exactly what we're looking for. And that's what it comes from.
Well, you just described that even after finishing your master's degree, you were teaching a little bit, which is an entirely different skill set than being the guy who's actually doing the thing that you're teaching. And the fact that you can do the thing and teach the thing at the same time makes you a pretty multifaceted guy. Anybody who's watching this thing by YouTube can look behind you and see some pretty incredible and very recognizable stuff on the walls behind you. I'm assuming that you took part in some of those scenes or some of those movies / television shows that are behind you.
Yes, there's definitely a lot of stuff back there. There's NDAs with all the work that I do. You're actually paid to be invisible. And so one of the things my family always ever brings up, my in-laws or whatever, is, hey, you just did this thing for the Tonight Show starring Jimmy Fallon. Are they going to put your name in the credits? I'm like, no. They put my name on the check.
No, they give me money for that, but they don't put me in IMDb for that, right?
Correct. So you just become part of the very first job I ever got with the Tonight Show. My wife was in labor. I'm not kidding you. With our third kid, she was literally like going through contractions. We're in the hospital, and I get a phone call, and it's a person I went to grad school with. And she's like, hey, Paul, what are you up to? I'm like, well, my wife's in the middle of labor right now, but
just nothing. I'm totally bored out of my mind right now. Meanwhile, your wife is throwing stuff at you.
Right. And so she's like, well, okay, well, I'll hang up. Like, no. Let's see what you got to say. You know, I'm not doing the contractions. That's my wife.
Because I'm not having a baby.
Right.
She is.
So, and they said, well, Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson is going to be on our show promoting Hercules. And he just on Instagram released this image of him with like a turtleneck and a chain and a fanny pack. And it's this horrible like 80s pose thing. And so they wanted to present him with an action figure where the box, like the back of the box, is all Hercules and all this. And then they turn it around and it is literally a recreation of that Instagram photo.
I love this.
And they're like, is there any way that you can get it to us by tomorrow? So I look at my wife, who's like trying to push out a baby. Of course,
because I've got nothing else going on right now.
So I asked her, I said, would you mind if I take this opportunity? And she's like, it's our third kid. Yeah, go ahead. You know, and
by the time you have three, they can, take care of themselves, right?
So I did. I went home and I made that, and the rest is history. And that's what they just called me up with some of the craziest things that you'd ever imagine. They just, can you do it?
You became the go-to guy whenever they had an idea but didn't know how to make this idea come into reality. Yep. You're the guy that says, I can do that. I can show you how to do that. We can figure that out. Yeah.
And what's fun is usually they call me up because they've talked to another house, a production house, and it's usually 7 to 10 people in that house. They need a few weeks, and they're like, okay, we need it day after tomorrow, and we just want to pay you. And I can do the same thing that those production houses take a lot of time and a lot of people to do. And that's just, again, the education playing into the creativity. Yeah.
Do you have a team that works for you?
Nope. It's all me. Huh.
So I recognize a little bit of the pressure that goes along with some of these, especially regular television shows. Believe it or not, long time ago, I was on the David Letterman show. We were going to do a skit, and they said, hey, here's the deal, man. This show films at 5. We air it at 9 or 10 p.m. There's zero margin for error. You got to get this right. We cannot do this scene twice. So are you ready? Here we go. And don't screw this up. And I was like, man, you have 2 or 3 hours of edit, or, ability to edit, and that's it. And then, when they say live with David Letterman, I mean, like it literally was just a couple of hours before he was sitting in the studio when this thing went live. And the pressure that goes along with that, man, there is zero margin for error right there. Mm-hmm. Like you got to get it right on the first shot or else.
They won't bring you back if you get it wrong. That's for sure.
That's what I was going to say. Most people don't fare well under that kind of pressure. Yeah. Like literally, almost all of us have some kind of timeline and some kind of deadlines that we have to live up to. But that kind of pressure on those kind of tight timelines, very few people can handle that, especially keep doing it for years or decades. So how do you handle the pressure, man?
I say I'm a little broken because I don't get the butterflies anymore. I can't even remember. Like I can walk on a stage full of thousands of people and not feel nervous in the least. Even when I can't remember my lines, I can go out there and it just doesn't.
Sure, because you're just going to make it up, right?
Sure, might as well. Like I know it. I have it. You can get the gist.
I love this guy.
And so I think that's really what it comes down to. Is I learned a long time ago that in life you have a lot of opportunities for things, and it's all divergent in the process. You have different options in every scenario that are going to happen. And once you wrap your brain around the fact that all of those are possible, you're never really surprised by any of them. And so when I talk to like my son's just starting to date. And so I tell him this exact same thing. I said, look, if you're interested in somebody and you ask them out, just be prepared for both answers. Because if you're prepared for both of them, you're never going to be so broken. You can still be excited. You can be disappointed, but don't let it wreck you. And one of the things that I actually teach now with my coaching and consulting is I talk about failure as a positive, like strive for failure.
100%. Yeah.
Because you don't learn doing anything right. You only learn when you screw something up.
Yeah, I'd love to dwell on this one with you for a second because we have this visceral distaste for failure in America.
Hmm.
I think it's true around the rest of the world, especially, developed countries. But people are so uh, paranoid about failure that they literally won't even try. And I've often said, like, if you're not willing to fail, and I mean fail spectacularly, you don't really care about something passionately enough. Because if you're passionate enough about it, you would be willing to stumble and fall on your face trying to make this thing happen, or, trying to accomplish this thing, and fall on your face a time or two before you start to get it right. If you're going to be one of those guys or gals that just waits for it all to fall into place before you even give it a shot, you're never even going to get the chance to give it a shot, right?
That's right. That's right. And one of the things that I teach is I call it failing creatively. What we don't understand in our pursuit of answers is that when we fail something, we're actually still learning. There is information to take away from the failure that will feed into the successes. And so I say failing creatively because if you can change your mindset from it being the negative that has very much a strong connotation, especially in the States, that instead of it being a failure that when something goes wrong, that it's bad, we look at it as, oh, what I did is I learned something. And it may not be applicable to the thing that you're trying to do in the moment, but it is definitely going to play somewhere else down the line. And the human brain is great because we absorb so much information over the course of our lifetime that we'll never think that we're going to use. But when it comes time for innovation, when we're talking about creativity, we're pulling from what we already know. And I tell people all the time, you only know what you know, which is why I'm such a big, strong proponent of constantly learning every day, because in your subconscious, that's when the puzzle pieces get put together. And so when you're learning or trying to invent something new or a new process, something like that, it doesn't, no one is like, there's no great being that's like jiggling your gray matter. It all comes from something that we already know. We just don't subconscious or consciously put it together. We subconsciously, which is why you never have a great idea when you're sitting at your desk trying to get work done. You have it when you're in the shower, when you're about to fall asleep, when you're driving, someplace where you wouldn't even be thinking about it. You're like, oh, that's, and that's because your subconscious has a moment to start putting things together.
I love it. You're talking directly to me right now, Paul. One of my first spectacular failures in the military. I was in the Army. I was attempting this very difficult physical training and it didn't work out. And there was another guy right next to me. It didn't work out for him either. Super high attrition rate. And he made a statement to me. I've never, ever forgot it, but it made me kind of relook or rethink the way that I view failure. He said, Jeff, you really only ever get two things in life. You either get what you want or you get experience. And oftentimes the experience that you get when you didn't get what you want, in other words, you failed and it didn't turn out the way you wanted to go, that experience is far more precious than getting what you want. Years and years of service in the military. And as I look back over it now, the most powerful moments of my life, both in and out of the military, are the moments that I failed and I learned something from failure. And what I learned from failure stuck with me a lot longer, made much bigger impact than all of those spectacular successes combined. And I would tell people, man, I almost want to go chase failure just because of the lessons and the benefits that come from giving it a shot and it doesn't work out for you. So, man, I just wrote down this phrase. I've never heard it before, to fail creatively, because really that is the goal, right? Fail, learn from it, grow from it, and let it inspire or cause you to create something better and more beautiful in the future from it.
Absolutely. And I think theater, for me, theater design, what the great thing about theater in itself is that a show will go up and a show will come down. Yeah. And you're working against a deadline.
Never lasts forever. It might have a long run, but it's not going to go on forever.
Exactly. And so it doesn't need to be perfect. And I love that aspect of it, because when we're designing things, or we're making art, or we're making whatever creative endeavor you have, we're always in this pursuit of making sure it's perfect before anyone sees it. And us as humans, we're never going to be perfect. We're going to be a mess regardless. It's how you present yourself. And if you have confidence in what you're presenting, in either yourself or the object that you have, of course you're going to have time to reiterate it later on, the next time you do it. But as long as you have the confidence in what you're presenting the first time, it's going to be good enough. And 99% of people won't understand that it wasn't to where you wanted it to be until you say something.
Yeah, that's the curse of perfection, right? The people that are perfectionists, they don't ever get started because they know I can't make this as perfect as I'd like it to be. Whereas people like you and me say, I'm going to give it everything that I got. It's not even going to be close to perfect, but it might be good enough that it will actually do what it's supposed to do and maybe even do it well.
Yep. And then if it is something that is successful, there will be opportunity to refine it later on.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit about what you do. For the audience that doesn't understand the phrase, I get this very well because I've signed non-disclosure agreements throughout my entire career serving in top secret roles. But non-disclosure agreements, the kind that I've signed, are binding for life. They will never ever go away, so I can never disclose some of the stuff. I'm certainly not going to ask you to break any non-disclosure agreements here and tell everybody exactly what you've done. But I would like people to see how this thing grew steadily and how it became bigger, and your role became more significant over time. Unless you're saying like the first day that I started doing stuff, people started offering me ridiculous amounts of money, and I was the guy making, stuff that everybody in the world wanted to know. How did he do that?
I think the biggest thing is, are you familiar with improv comedy at all?
Yes, of course.
Okay.
Those guys and gals are geniuses.
Absolutely. And they have one rule.
On the spot, just turn something into hilarious with zero preparation.
Exactly. And what's their one rule? What's their number one rule?
I don't remember.
It's called yes and. And what it is,
the yes and rule. Yeah,
that's right. And what it is that you never say no, because when you say no, you break the flow. And so my entire career has been yes and. And so I started off, I was a professor and somebody wanted me to make a figure. Can you do that? Yeah, sure. And really that's been the crux of it. I put that online. I started a website, and then people just started asking me randomly, can you make this? Can you make this? Can you make this? Yes. And so instead of just I say bend, don't break. Don't get so rigid in your thinking that you can't adjust yourself constantly. And so that's what I'm doing. I'm like a reed in the wind. I like to bend to things. So it's all within the skill set, but it's not, I don't create a product. Like honestly, you look behind me, you'll not see one product that you're like, oh, I know that Paul made that. It's like, I make so many different things because that's what people have requested of me. So what my real product is creative problem solving. And so what happened is after 5-7 years, eventually somebody who works for works for one of those bigger industries, they're lower on the ranking there. They're like, hey, we'd like to give a gift to our boss. Like one of them that I did was for Disney animation, television animation. Their boss was retiring. And so they wanted an action figure of him to give him as a thank you for all the years that he did. And I'm like, you guys are Disney. You can make action figures in-house. I'm like, no, we want you to do it. And so they gave me the parameters and they gave it to him as a gift. And then from there, then it's like, oh, well, we're working on this TV show. We need a really weird action figure. Can you do that? I'm like, yep, yes, and just keep doing that. And eventually what happens is you just become known as the guy who just will do whatever is thrown at you.
The guy who can get it done, right? Yep. That's what you became known as.
And I'm really quick. I mean, I think that's a large part of it. Having a team is great. Don't get me wrong. I would love to have a bunch of people assisting me. But what happens is you get held up in the mechanism of it, because one person has to finish their job before the next person can begin. Whereas if I can do every aspect of it, I can work very fast and efficiently, and I have a high quality at the same time, because I'm not having to worry about, will this person's work be up to date? Will it be fast enough, to be able to hit these tight turnarounds? And so I think that's played a large part in it as well, is that I can produce things of high quality very, very quickly. And that all just comes down to skill and practice. I mean, I wish I have a coach of mine who says that your ordinary is everyone else's extraordinary.
Yep.
And for me, he's like, well, you work with Disney. Yeah. You know, it's like, I'm like, it's just
He's
that,
just
that
he's
was
just
Wednesday.
yawning. Yeah, I worked with Disney, the biggest entertainment industry company on the planet.
But
Yeah, no big deal.
yeah, it's not a big, you know, it's just whatever. But that's because you just get so used to doing the work aspect of it. And to me, I get asked a lot, like, what's your favorite thing you've ever made? And honestly, I can't even remember half the stuff I make. For me, it's always the process. I love the problem solving. So when somebody calls me up and says, hey, we need 7 trophies by tomorrow, you have 10 hours. Can you make it that look like an Oscar, but it has to be changed 20% because otherwise it's copyright infringement?
Yeah,
All this.
right. Or else somebody's going to go to jail.
Right. And so they're like, how can you do it? And then we need 6 of them. And I live in Nebraska, which is the middle of the country. And there's no entertainment business in Nebraska. So I'm always having to fly it off to a coast, one or the other. And so they're like, we need it done by 6 a.m. so that we can have it in our desk by 3 p.m. on a coast. And it's, to me, that challenge is always, it's so exciting to me because it's like, can it be done? You know?
You're describing most people's nightmare at work. If their boss comes into the office and says, it's 6 p.m., can you have these 7 widgets ready for us by 6 a.m. tomorrow morning? And by the way, you know, they've never been built before, never been designed before. Can you do that? And of course, Paul says, yeah, man, yes, and I can do that. But everybody else is like, are you insane? No, I can't do that. Who on the right mind would agree to that?
And honestly, I think that's a very important point, because I think we as a society have become so like answer driven and like making sure everything is right, and we are profit driven, that we lose that ability to be like, do we have room to play? Do we have room to try and make this up and make something that's different and potentially fail at it? And when they hire me, they're like, granted, the windows are tight, but they're like, I can fail all I want because the only person I'm going to have to answer to is myself, as long as I hit the deadline. But I'm okay with the failure because I know I might be able to use it on something else.
Yeah.
I'm going to tell you, and I don't tell this one very often because the piece never made it to air, but I was working on a show, and they wanted to, they're like, we need shock collars for actors. So if they get an answer wrong, we want to shock them. But obviously we can't.
You're going to for real shock them?
No, they couldn't for real, because obviously their lawyers said we couldn't do that.
Yeah,
so we need to do something else.
The insurance company and the lawyer would have something to say about that.
So like, instead we want to have these like collars that they wear that vibrate, but like really vibrate.
Violently vibrate around their neck.
So that they look like they're getting shocked, but they're not actually being injured. And so they're like, okay, we need to have like, you know, we need 3 of these working models, and we need it by X amount of time. We need one that each person's going to wear, and then a backup. I'm like, okay. And so I was like, I need to do this very quickly. So what can I use that's going to vibrate very strong? And so I had to go to an adult store, and I bought 9. Like, I walk up the same, it's a family show, I'm sure, so I'm not going to tell you exactly what it was, but I bought 9 of them, and I walked up to the counter, and the lady's like, you only have room for 1. I'm like, no, it's for a show.
It's not for me.
Right? And so, of course, that's what everybody says, right? And so I'm walking out of the store, and I'm holding 9 of these things, and eventually, you know, and they worked. It was really impressive, but at the end of the day, they're like, yeah, we don't even need these. And so they gave them all back to me. So I'm like, what am I going to do with 9 of the, you know, but it's interesting because they, you know, you need to know like what produces this effect, that it is, you're going to have something that does what you want, but it's not what it's intended to be. And it's that out of the box thinking. And so keeping your mind open to, you know, like I wander to the hardware store or the hobby store, and I'll look at everything, and I'll be like, ooh, what can I use that for? And my wife,
your family's like, oh no, Dad's going into the hardware
that's
store
right.
again.
Like, you're on your own.
This is
See you in a couple hours. Yep.
Well, this is true genius, man. And I really mean this, creative genius. I can go to the museums and see all of the sculptures and the paintings, and it's spectacular what the masters have done. But honestly, when I watch custom made pieces of equipment, I sit there and look at it. Like when I watch people that can fabricate a piece of metal and turn it into a part that never existed before, I'm sitting there like, what kind of a mind can figure out how to make these bends and these turns when there's no template, there's nothing to follow. You just got to sit there and, you know, kind of in your mind figure it out. And then your hands have to know how to be able to do what you can see in your mind. And for me, Paul, that is real genius. I can walk by machinery that's kind of custom one off and say, that is a piece of art right there. Most people are like, that's a dirty piece of metal. No, man, that is a real genius piece of art. But it also comes from the reps, right? Like, you got to put the reps in early on to be able to do a little bit better and more creative pieces. And then you put the reps in with those so that you can do better and more creative pieces. And then pretty soon you're the guy doing what nobody else can pull off.
Yep. Have you ever seen the show How It's Made?
Yes, I watched every episode for like a season or two because I was sitting there scratching my head like, I've never really thought about how do they make one of those? How do you mass produce toothpicks and how do you make aluminum cans? And
Exactly. And for every single one of those machines that makes the things, it was one person who started it off.
yeah,
They're like, I have to do this 1,000 times a day. There's got to be a better way to do this.
yes,
And then they're
yes,
like,
yeah.
if I can make a machine that does this, then I can go do something else. And that's literally, they say necessity is the mother of invention, right?
Uh-huh.
But what we always lose sight of is we say necessity is the mother of invention, and we think that we're inventing for the world. We're not. Necessity is the mother of invention for yourself.
To make your life just a little bit easier, right?
Exactly. And so those machines that we see that make the things that make the thing, you know, like that is just somebody in the assembly line who's like, I've got to figure out a way to make this more efficient. And I think that everybody does do a job of some degree in which there is a matter of repetition that we've either figured out a way to make it more efficient, or we're constantly thinking about how can we make this more efficient. Because time is our most valuable asset. And if we can give ourselves back even 30 seconds to a minute here and there, it's definitely worth it. And I think that's where the creativity comes from. And it's just exposing yourself to enough inputs from different areas, which is why, you know, study everything, even things that may not be of interest to you. And that's why I like social media, because I use social media to scroll through videos of things being put together, people harvesting stuff like, where does this food come from? Because it's out of my wheelhouse, but taking all that information in, I'm like, oh, that's a specialized tool for getting that out. And I might be able to put that into something into use later on. And that's really where the genius comes from.
I was just thinking, you started working in the entertainment industry, designing things. What time frame?
That would have been about 2002, 2003.
Okay, so at this point, we are pretty heavily doing computer generated sets and props, but much of the technology that we have today didn't exist back then. So I got to have really solid stuff that the eye is convinced is real, but you and I both know it's not real. And we don't have the computer technology to be able to make it look real. So I need Paul to be able to do it. I need Paul to be able to do it in world record time. And as you were talking, I was just thinking some of the stuff that you worked on was at a time where there literally wasn't the technology with computers to generate it. So if Paul can't make it, it can't be done.
Yeah. Yeah. That's what it comes down to. And what's nice about it is, like, I have a full wood shop, but I also have a full 3D printing shop. And believe it or not, they're very similar. It's just, they're just tools. It's just instead of being like woodworking is subtractive. You're taking wood and you're either removing parts of it, and putting, and then 3D printing is just additive. It's like sculpting.
Additive. Yeah.
And so it's there, as long as you can wrap your head around the mindset of it. And I've seen like 3D printing started when I was working, and it's gotten better. And I've been through every iteration of it, and it's come a long way, but it's still not perfect, just like any woodworking shop. But I have a CNC cutter, which I just program a computer, put a piece in there, and then the computer will cut it out for me. I could do it by hand, but it's not as efficient. And so, yes, being able to adapt to the newer technologies helps because it gives me more time. It makes things more efficient. So like with the 3D printing, I can do these overnight things because I design it once. If they need 6 of them, I can put it on the printer and let the printer print it 6 times. Then I'm just finishing it. It doesn't mean I'm cheating. And I know a lot of people think that that's the case, but it's not. It's being more efficient with your time and using the tools that are available.
Of course. And who wouldn't use a machine that can exactly replicate what you've already designed in your head, what you've already programmed into the computer to make the machine cut 6 times so that you don't have to cut it individually by hand 6 times. I want us to go down a little bit of your resume. And I mean this quite literally. My wife is a huge Jimmy Fallon fan, The Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon. So you had a chance to work on some pretty big projects in the past. And again, we're not going to say exactly what you did on those projects, but when she hears that you worked on the Tonight Show with Jimmy Fallon, she's going to be thrilled to hear this. So, can you describe a little bit about some of those relationships, how they developed, and if possible,
Hopefully
give
we didn't
people
lose you
kind of an
there.
idea of, yeah.
Okay, there we go.
Yeah.
Yeah. So basically, what happens is the writers' room. They meet every day, and then they just pitch ideas. And Jimmy is there, or the head writer is there, and he listens to the ideas, and they think, oh, and since it's a daily talk show, it needs to be topical.
Yeah.
And so the jokes that come up, they have to be hidden. But if you have to make something, it has to happen fast enough that it's still in the public eye as fast as these trends go. And so what they do is they'll throw out a bunch of ideas of skits they want to do or whatnot. And then the first thing they do is they turn to the production team and they go, is this even possible? And fortunately for me, when they talk about really, really out of the wall stuff or off the wall stuff, they've got a guy that they can go to. They'll be like, yeah, let me text him, see what's up. And then, honestly, when the Tonight Show calls, you're like, yeah, I've got nothing going on right now.
That's right. I'm so totally bored, just sitting around reading a book,
waiting for you guys to call. And so basically, then I give them a bid. They go back, they say, is this within budget? Typically, it is, and they're like, okay, can you meet our time frame? And then, the answer is always yes.
That right there is where the genius happens, right? Like, not only can you do this, but can you do this for this price and this amount of time?
Yes. And sometimes it's, and I will be the first to admit, sometimes I've misbid horribly because you think, oh, it's just going to take this little minute. And then it ends up being this giant time suck, where you're literally working 24 hours straight to hit the deadline. And you're like, I did not charge enough for that. I mean, it happens to everybody. It doesn't matter how long you've been doing this. And then it's just about making it and it's for television. So you got to make everything television ready, which means they're going to see it in HD. You can't fudge corners. It's got to be pristine. And so then it's just about manufacturing. I think I've done 3 or 4 functional robots for them.
For real?
Yes.
Nice.
One was a singing, dancing, talking robot. And I can talk about it because it's seen air, so I'm not stealing their thunder. That's their big to do. But what I made it for was right before the pandemic hit, they were doing this game show, and they wanted to have people buzz in, but it was the robot would say the lyrics to a song, but it'd say it really weird, and you had to guess what it is. And so their hands were like the little buzzers and stuff. And I made that for them. And what a lot of people don't understand is that if it's a topical thing, you can make it really quickly. You can get it to them on time, and it still doesn't make the cut. So I've probably made a few dozen things for the Tonight Show, and I'd say a third of them have aired. Just because you hit, you still get paid. It's just, I'm sure that there is a shelf in their studio that is just things Paul has made.
That's right.
And what's funny is, like, occasionally they'll pop back up. They're like, oh, we've got this really cool looking robot. So I think one of them that I did never made it to air for what it was supposed to be for, which was an interview bot during the pandemic. So they were going to send a robot to interview people because you couldn't have 2 people in the same room together. And so they're like, oh, we're just going to send this robot. And then somebody will be off stage talking, and it'll come out as a robot voice, and it's the robot interviewer. That's hilarious. Never happened. But then I got a message from somebody, and they're like, oh, I think your robot was on last night in a music video. I'm like, what? So I Googled it, and they did. It was Paul Rudd and Jimmy doing something called Teeny Weeny Beanie. And there's this robot that's doing like Teeny Weeny Beanie. And I'm like, yeah, that's my robot. There it is. Not at all what it was supposed to be for. But it ends up being a really cool piece that they've invested in, and they might as well use it on something else. And that's typically how it happens.
I'm writing down that Jimmy Fallon has Paul on speed dial, or has Paul saved in his favorites, because if we are going to try to pull this skit off in a daily television show, then Paul's going to have to crank something out tonight, and he's going to have to be really, really fast about it.
Now, I had the opportunity, because I live in Nebraska, and so I had the opportunity to actually go to New York, and the friend of mine who has helped me get these jobs, she's the production designer who works there, and she gave me the tour. And a hilarious story about this, because I'm the guy who makes all the custom random, not all of them, but if it's a high-end, really bizarre thing, it's typically my work.
Okay, hold on. I got to write this down. Paul's claim to fame is, if it's high-end and really bizarre, I made that.
That's what it is.
Okay.
But I went to go meet everybody, and I was given the tour, and everywhere that they introduced me, I wasn't Paul, the guy who makes cool things. I was Paul from Nebraska. And every single person went, oh, like I had gotten on a magic
He's
flying
the
bird.
Paul from Nebraska. We don't care about that other guy. What's his name? Warren Buffett. This is the Paul. This is the guy from Nebraska that everybody wants to shake his hand.
Well, there's only 3 of us here, so it's it's me, Warren Buffett, and some random farmer. That's all it is. So
Um, you and I were talking just before we started recording about some pretty other epic projects that people all over the world would be familiar with. Maybe somebody has heard of this little movie series called Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. So you've worked television, Jimmy Fallon, you've worked theater, New York City, but you've worked major motion pictures too. And again, without violating NDAs, can you talk a little bit about your work for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles?
So with the TMNT, I worked on a promotional project for them. They were re-releasing the 80s version. They're like updating the 80s version to come out with new episodes, but they look like the 80s version, ones I grew up with, the cartoons. And so they were doing a big promotion with it, and they wanted to do a bunch of giveaways to kind of hype it up. And so they bought 8, it's 8, 12 because 8, whatever, doesn't matter. So they bought Xbox Series S's, these Xboxes, and they wanted to theme them out. And so they had gotten bids from some people to do like some stickers on them and that kind of stuff. And I decided that my bid would be a little bit different. And so we actually themed them out into things. And so we had like the full-on Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle van, like the turtle van. The Xbox was hidden inside of it. The little fin on the back of the fan was the controller, and then you just plug it in. But you could fit your action figures inside of it. It was huge, just over 2 feet
I'm
long.
blown away.
And then
Yeah.
I did one. I actually got to work with Kevin Eastman, who's the designer, the original designer of Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles. He originally, the comic was a black and white comic, and so what I did is I actually created a 4-sided Xbox case, and then on it were panels from the original Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle comic book, but they were coming out. They were 3-dimensional. And so
Wow.
at every side was a different one. So it was depicting each of the different turtles. I did one with Shredder bursting out of a brick wall with, the Foot Clan on there and all that. And I did one of each of the turtle shells, and they lit up on the inside depending on the color of the turtle that it was. And just a lot of. So that was my favorite. And the Eastman box was my personal favorite because it was definitely one of a kind. It was working with somebody who I admire. Kevin Eastman, obviously a wonderful artist, and but it was a 3D relief sculpture. So I got to show 3D printing. I got to show design. I got to show my inking and illustration, as well as actual hand sculpting. And it just went to some random person somewhere in the world has
No
this
way.
Xbox that is just totally decked out in Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles.
I was so disappointed. I thought you were going to tell me that you worked on one of those Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, weapons. But now that you're saying you became the Pimp My Xbox guy for Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles, I'm even more impressed.
It
Like,
ended up being pretty epic. Yeah.
some kid has got the ultimate Xbox sitting around, and everybody else comes over to his house. They don't want to play the Xbox. They just want to look at it. Like,
Absolutely.
that thing is awesome.
Absolutely. Ended up being it was probably one of my favorite projects to work on, just because it was so completely different. Like every box ended up being thematically. I made a full playable miniature arcade of the 80s Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle game,
yes.
but
Yeah, the
inside of it
game.
was an Xbox. So you had the controller, but you had a screen, but you also had an Xbox, so you
love
could
it.
play. And so it was like this really it stretched my creativity like to the limits, because not only was I designing an arcade, but it had to fit an Xbox, but I had to have a screen that was functional so that I could play the arcade. I mean, it was so bizarre. And, that's not something I'm doing every day. And a lot of, like, this is the bend, don't break. It's like, I know how to do all these little individual things, but can I figure out how to package all these different ideas into one piece? And then the very next week do something that's completely different. It's all hand sculpting and whatnot. And that's the idea behind it, is so that you can, literally bend, not break. And here you go. I'll show you.
Oh, look at that right there. I see it.
It's
Wow.
yeah. So that's the arcade that we had there.
Man, that thing is awesome. Okay, maybe the listeners are familiar with this little movie franchise called Harry Potter. And my guess is more than a few of them from around the world have traveled to Universal Studios.
Yep.
So again, without violating any agreements, what'd you do for them, man?
That one I can't tell you exactly what I did. You have to go to the park and look
of
for it.
course.
What a lot of people don't understand is when you go to some place like Universal Studios or Disney, when you see a character, like an actual character in what I worked on, especially in Harry Potter world, there are very iconic people playing specific roles. There's not just one person who plays it. It's usually between 50 and 75 people doing that one role. It just depends on the day that they're there. And so what I did is I helped to build some parts for the props that they're wearing, is about as far as I can go on that one, for specific characters in the park, because they needed something that could be manufactured in a short run. The short run is usually less than 100. When you go to have things manufactured in larger houses, they want to make thousands of pieces because it's not cost effective to build small runs. And so when they needed something that was highly intricate, but they didn't need thousands and thousands of them, that's where someone like me comes in handy, because I can design these short run pieces. And then if they ever need more, they need 5 or 10, or they need another 50.
You can just crank them out for them.
It's easy enough for me to do. Yep. And so I'm
just going to say you're part of the reason why when kids walk through the Harry Potter part of the park, they're blown away by what they're seeing, is basically what you're saying.
Absolutely. And a good friend of mine and my wife, she's actually the person who does all the costumes for all of the parks, and she's working on the new Epic Park, and they got a new Harry Potter world in there as well. And you would just be surprised, like the amount of detail and thinking that goes into all of this stuff. And so,
yeah, again, I really think this is genius. And part of your genius is not only did you do this thing with lasers and your 3D printer yesterday, but tomorrow you're using your hands and sculpting, and the day after that you're building a robot out of parts and pieces. And to be able to go from X to Y to Z like that, man, wow, that takes incredible creativity.
Yeah, this week I think I'm working on. I've got a Wizard of Oz reproduction of the giant crystal ball that she had. That's a mixture of hand sculpting and 3D printing. I've got a Mandalorian figure that is made to look like someone in particular, so it's them in full costume, but they get to tell me all the things that they're holding. So that's done there. I made a leather journal, which is completely customized with a magical lock that's attached to it, and then I made a Wally ring box for a proposal. That was my week this week. So,
wow,
just it's all random, all different skill sets thrown together, and then
under enormous time pressure. And great, and by the way, you better knock it out of the park if you ever want us to call you again.
Yeah.
Man, listen, a lot of guys way back in childhood, when you were going through that kind of mental and physical abuse, that would have beat them down so much that they withdrew. They never were willing to go try out for those high school plays. They would never be willing to put their skills on display because, they've been literally beat down by others or by life so bad that they'd never be willing to do it. And you've been one of those guys that's more than willing to just give it a try and willing to fail and learn and grow from it. So I want to kind of wrap this episode up by saying, can you give some advice out there to that person who maybe wants to start a new career, or maybe they have a dream, but deep inside they're like, man, things have gone wrong for me so many times that I don't even know if I want to give it a try, because I may fail or it may blow up in my face. And you're the living proof. Yeah, it might fail. Yes, it actually may blow up in your face, but you can learn a lot. You can grow a lot, and maybe something far more beautiful is waiting for it down the road. So can you wrap us up by giving some advice to people that are wrestling with doing something very different and not sure if they want to take the risk?
When I was in 4th grade, I was in my very first play. I played scientist number 2 in the Thomas Alva Edison story. And why this is important is because in there is a song. Thomas Edison, known for being an inventor. And the song is called "Nothing is Impossible If You Try." And that song was a big chorus number for everybody, so we all had to learn it. And that song plays on repeat in my head all the time. The point is you're getting one opportunity to run through this video game we call life. And the big thing is there are no do-overs. You can't start the level again. And there's no point in your life in going through it with regret.
Oh, that's great advice right there.
You don't have. I like I said, I'm a 2 feet in kind of guy, and the reason that is because I want to make sure that everything that I do, that I don't end the day thinking, gosh, if only I had sat behind a desk for 8 hours a day in a cubicle for 40 hours a week for
Yeah.
50 years of my life.
Cranking out spreadsheets every
Right.
day, all day long.
I think that, and I understand that is a necessity for our life, but human beings are the only creature that we know of who have the ability to imagine and create. And the fact that we don't want to take that because of the risk of the fear of failure is a loss to everyone. Because if we just accepted that, we may not get it right, but we can make our lives a little bit better by trying, just imagine how much more progress we could make as the human race. One of the things that I like to point out to people is that we went from the Wright brothers getting off on Kitty Hawk for 8 seconds in the air to landing on the moon in the same amount of time that we have since landing on the moon to now, and we have made less progress. Went from never flying to the moon, and now we're at the moon to nothing. And it's because we've changed our focus from being the creative, innovative creatures that we are to just being so driven by profits and survivability. And we really need to change that mindset. So go out there and just try something new that you want to. If you want to do it, no, the only person who's going to be disappointed that doesn't turn out is you.
Wow. Yes. No, this is great advice. I don't think I've ever thought of it the way that you're describing it right now. For that person out there that has a dream, but they're letting fear of failure hold them back from pursuing that dream. I've never really made the connection, but it's absolutely true. It's totally brilliant. What you're doing is you're going to end up going through life with regret, but actually everyone loses if you don't at least give it a try. Even if you try and fall flat on your face again and again, like Theodore Roosevelt said, the man in the arena will do. Even if you try and you didn't succeed, at least you gave it a try. But to not try is a guarantee that you and everyone around you that could benefit from what you tried, Orville and Wilbur Wright style, everyone loses when you don't try. And Paul, you are a guy who's been willing to give some things a try, and some of them have worked. Some of them haven't, but everyone, literally everyone who's seen your movies, television shows, or been to the theme parks benefit from your willingness to try. So, man, thank you for the stuff that you've created out there that most of us will never even know. Paul put his fingerprint on that.
I love it. I mean, I'm Santa Claus for nerds, is what I tell people, and it's the truth. I'm like, I love what I do, and I love to be able to create and give something back to people. My wife says I make memories tangible, and I think that's the whole point. Is we go through life and things need to mean something. They need to matter, and I think that it's it's a gift to be able to help people do that. And to give them something that every time they look at it, they remember a time and space.
Oh, man. That's beautiful.
I think it's a privilege. It truly is.
That is beautiful right there. I love your wife's description, making memories tangible, so that every time I grab this thing, I remember, a moment in time. That's beautiful right there. Thanks, Paul, for being my guest on this episode, man.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, it's been great talking to you. Man, I loved Paul's wife's description of Paul being a guy that makes memories tangible. But I also love the fact that Paul is describing when you choose not to take the risk of failure, when you choose not to go out and pursue the dream, not only will you end up living a life of regret, which is miserable, no one wants to go through that, but you actually deprive the world of some of your creativity. So thanks, Paul, for this incredible interview today. And I want to thank everybody who tuned in and watched this thing on YouTube and saw some of Paul's incredible pieces behind him, or those of you who are listening on your favorite podcast platform. If you're not already subscribing, why don't you go ahead and follow us or subscribe on your favorite platform, because you can go back and hear some pretty amazing other episodes, or you'll stay up to date on future guests. You can also connect with us on social media. We're out there on almost all the platforms. Just search for @Unbeatable Podcast. And this week, I get a chance to honor a hero of mine. Our fan of the week for this week is Pat Payne. And Pat, I want to tell you, man, I think the world of you. If you are listening and you don't know who Pat Payne is, just go out there and search for T.Payne, M-O-H, and the M-O-H stands for Medal of Honor. Pat, you're awesome. Thank you for staying connected with our podcast and for everybody who's connected with us on social media. And one final way, I try to be a little bit creative. I created a little video, and this is my motivational video. No matter what you're going through in life, I created segments in this video that should give you the courage to just face the challenges. If you want this video, I'll send it to you totally free. And all you have to do is simply go over to unbeatablearmy.com. Thank you for joining me for this episode. I hope you heard something from Paul that caused you to say, I've got a dream. I'm going to go take on a challenge. I'll see you right back here next week. God bless.
These stories of triumph over adversity will help you handle your toughest days in life and become unbeatable.